Welcome and thank you for joining us for another segment of the Jane Irrigation Training Series. I'm very excited today because today we're going to be talking about growing in substrate. And to me, I think this is a fairly new practice. And what's important about it to me is we're seeing a lot of growers shifting what they're doing and moving to this new process. And more importantly, what we're going to learn about it today is why people are doing it, how they're doing it, and what benefit it brings to their operations when they do this. And so all very positive conversation here. And leading us through this conversation today is Cassie Toves. And for those of you who know Cassie, you know what a inspiration she's been to a lot of people getting into the irrigation business. What I say is she's part of that new generation, a younger generation that is embracing technology and new processes and helping move agriculture forward. She graduated from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo with a degree in agriculture system management. Go Mustangs. And, she's been very active in processes and design for irrigation. It's a great combination of study. If you talk to anybody in the Central Valley and Central Coast, they know Cassie, they know she's an expert in the field, and they really appreciate the advice and wisdom she provides them when talking about irrigation and agriculture. So Cassie, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So we're, middle of June already. I can hardly believe it. This year is just flying by. How has the season been so far with the growers you're working with?
No, I mean, we've stayed really busy. I feel like all the growers are staying busy. Obviously, with this whole coronavirus thing, we had a little bit of kind of volatility and unknown of what was happening. Now, really, it's just kind of the supply chain issues people are having. But everybody's been staying, I would say, busy as usual, just wishing we would have got a little bit more rain. So.
Yeah. So is everybody talking about the water situation right now?
Yeah, I've got a couple growers. I mean, here on the coast, we're lucky. We have, pretty good water source coming out of groundwater already. But a lot of my growers over in the Central Valley are really struggling right now on being able to figure out, where they're going to be able to get water from or how they're trying to kind of meet all of their needs out in the field, because there's just not a lot of availability for pumping right now.
Yeah, it's interesting when I see the numbers, like they're going to be supplied with 5%. The first thing you think about is a 5% reduction, and no, they mean 5% of the total.
Yeah.
Very, very little water, and some I know have been told they're going to get none. So yeah, kind of an interesting situation. Now, today we're talking about substrate farming, and I'm just curious as to what substrate farming is. And more importantly, does it save any water?
Yeah, so the good answer is yes and no. A plant needs a certain amount of water no matter how it grows, but it's how effectively and efficiently we can get it that water so that we're not wasting anything. So short answer of what is substrate farming is typically growing in anything besides soil media. So kind of most common ones you would see are a rock wool or cocoa core blend, and they either put those into a potted plant type application or into a trough or gutter. The next option you see is almost kind of like a foam material, if you haven't seen it before, that the plants get planted into. And they're kind of like a plastic wrapped cube or bag. And then you could go as far as to say, hydroponics and aeroponics are, would be considered kind of a substrate growing because it's not your conventional type of soil grown plants.
How interesting. So the substrate that we see, I think this is maybe in your middle picture. Is this like what you see like when you get flowers from a florist or something like that? Is it the same type material?
It's kind of the best way you could describe it. It's a little less kind of styrofoamy feeling than that, a little bit more organic feeling, but it is very kind of similar, for lack of a better correlation. That's kind of what I would tell most people. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. So what, you say anything that is not soil, growing in substrate. What are some of the popular substrates people are growing in right now?
For crops or for the actual media itself?
For the actual media itself.
So typically I would say the majority of stuff that we see is either this kind of Grodan, that's the brand that's there, that kind of foam type material, or a mixture of coco coir and peat moss. And then depending on which manufacturer you're getting that from, you can kind of pick your own blend ratio. And those are kind of the two big ones that you would see for right now.
Yeah. So, and what makes those popular is just been success, or is this just kind of the best available option?
I think it's just kind of, the United States is kind of behind, I would say, in substrate when it comes to it. A lot of other countries have been doing this for a long time. So I think a lot of what we're using is just kind of trickle down from what's worked in other areas. And then obviously, depending on the specific plant, there's kind of different ratios you can make of those blends to be able to work for you best. But a lot of it's just, I think, kind of tried and true from prior industries.
Huh. Interesting. So I'm always fascinated by this, and I want to remind people. I see we got a question coming in, and the Q&A is open as well as the chat. And if you drop your questions or comments in there, I will get them to Cassie when it's appropriate. One of the questions that's coming up right now is, can the substrate be reused after harvest? Could you get more than one pass at this?
Yes, so it really depends on the substrate and your kind of growing practices. But let's say for strawberries grown on tabletops, mostly those are grown in a bag that's about 1 meter long, and they put 3 or 4 plants within that meter. They can actually remove that strawberry plant and replant into it. And we've had some growers that have done that, 2-3 turns, be able to reuse those, but it is a labor intensive process. When you're using something that's more of an open trough that's filled with the media, it's a lot easier for you to be able to remove the plant, replace any media that you might have lost, and then keep going. So it can be reused. So much on the kind of blocks, those typically we don't see get reused because the root intrusion it fills that whole thing up with roots. So it's really just kind of a one and done on those.
Right. So, but if you had, for instance, blueberries that stay around for a few years, right? You're good for the length of that plant.
Yep.
So we have another question coming in, and it's asking, when you say foam, what exactly is that? I don't know. Is it a chemically made foam, or do you have any idea on this?
I know the different manufacturers all have different stuff that they use to make them, and there are quite a few different manufacturers of this stuff. But I think some of them are like perlite that's used in them to be made. I don't know all the specifics of all of them because it's not something that we sell, so I haven't dove too deep into that market. But I know they all kind of have a different blend that they're using.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. So the thing that always confused me about this is I always thought that, when you're growing, that you really, you want to put your plants in soil, you want them to get deep roots, you want to have them, plenty of soil to grab their nutrients from. And so then this was kind of like a 180 spin on this, right? Spin it around. Now I want to go into a small container that my roots aren't going to get a lot of penetration or get very deep. How does all this work? Who figured this out? I mean, I just don't understand.
Yeah, I know. I mean, again, it's kind of been happening in other areas for a long time. And I think a lot of it came down to just, what was available. If the soil wasn't compatible with that crop that you were trying to grow or different things, that what else can we use? I think the one that baffles me the most is aeroponics, where you literally have the roots just open air and you're spraying them with a water fertilizer mix and the plants just continue to grow. But I mean, really all substrate really is just any media that's going to allow for an organism to grow and uptake nutrients. So it doesn't have to be soil specifically. It's really anything that's going to allow for that.
So I would think that one of the issues people would face is that the roots might get too much exposure to air or sun or light, artificial light, and that would cause damage. How do people get around that?
Yeah, so in these cases, when you're in a pot, obviously the roots are growing down inside of that pot, so they're not going to get exposed to any UV or anything like that. But there is quite a bit of air that's allowed to circulate through those pots, typically because they're made because they want that air circulation. In the bags, again, the bag itself just has a small hole where the plant is going into, so the roots are then contained inside the bag. And similar with these blocks, very common. The outside's all wrapped, so the roots are still being drawn down towards the bottom of the block, not up towards the surface where they're going to be damaged.
Huh. Interesting. And then the troughs, like that the strawberries are growing in,
Mm-hmm.
they always look like to me that they're just rain gutters off houses, but I think they're more than that. What are they?
Honestly, they're pretty similar. So the equipment that's used to make them is really similar. It shows up as a big flat roll of metal that they send through an extruding machine that then forms it into that gutter. And there's different shaped gutters, but virtually what we want is for the bag to be able to sit on there, any drainage to be able to get out from away from that bag into a different channel and then leave the table. So it's very similar to a gutter on your house, just a little bit different in the shape to be able to allow for that water flow out.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So then, but now, instead of being in soil that I might have, 15-inch roots, I've got just a small area.
Yeah.
And, I might be watering every couple of days, of course, depending on ET and what's happening, but might be watering every couple of days. Now I think with the substrate, I'm going to be watering more often. Is that right?
Yeah, and I'll kind of jump ahead here a little bit. So that's one of the big things that you're going to have is the amount that you need to irrigate is going to change. So when you're irrigating, let's say out in the field, you have a huge soil capacity for these plants that you're growing. So you can irrigate maybe once every other day, once every 3 days, and fill that whole soil area with water that then the plants can draw from over the next couple days for their water and nutrient needs. Now you're looking at this really small, tiny area with a small water holding capacity that we need to be able to fill. So now what you're looking at is where you need to be able to irrigate frequently and small pulse irrigations. So we want to give the plant exactly what it needs when it needs it so that it can use it and then irrigate again. So going from maybe something that was, every other day irrigation to now maybe 20 times per day that you're irrigating this plant. So it is a very different strategy for irrigation.
So how do I learn if it's 20 times a day, 10 times a day? Are these growers, turning the irrigation on, watching to see when the soil gets full, and then turning it off and figuring it out over time? Are they using soil moisture sensors? How are they figuring this out?
Yeah, so some popular things that we use for irrigation, just in general for distributing the water on these systems is, your standard plain tubing with a punch-on emitter. Some people like using a stake assembly. We're seeing a big push now to just an inline drip tubing, so that the cost is a lot better on that, and the labor for having to actually punch on the emitters is a big saving. So we're seeing a lot of people try to push towards that. And then obviously some other automation things that are going to come in there. When you need to irrigate 20 times a day, you do not want to hire somebody who's running around opening and closing valves all over your ranch all day long. So automation has become a really big thing when it comes to substrate growing. It allows us to be able to automate the irrigations itself, as well as tie into a lot of other data-driven collection. So with that, we're able to then make better decisions. Oops, I think I went one too far for you. You're allowed to make a lot better decisions on things. So some of the software that we have available through different platforms that we use for automation will allow for you to integrate soil moisture probes to see what the actual soil moisture is in a representative group of plants. We even have systems that come down to weighing the plants to be able to tell you the actual water capacity in the pots. And then from that, we can calculate what the drainage is. So we can say, all right, at this point we got drain. We know that we're at, field capacity on those plants, and then be able to allow a specific amount of dry back to allow those roots to dry out enough to be able to trigger the next irrigation. We can calculate your drain percentage off the ranch, what the EC values are off of the drain water. So knowing if you're putting on enough fertilizers, if the plant is uptaking the fertilizer properly, all of those things can now kind of be tied into this automation platform to allow this new decision-making process that might not be what you're used to, more easy to manage.
Yeah, how interesting, especially the weighing the plant. I thought that was really great. So different technology, right?
Right.
And how easy is it for growers to learn this technology? Is it a struggle for them? Do they have lots of choices? How's all that work?
Yeah, so the ag tech space has obviously been exploding for quite a few years now, with a lot of players coming in, a lot of players also leaving every year. So it's a little bit volatile, and making sure that you're partnering with the right product or the right manufacturer of those products when you do decide to go into automation, because you're going to need support. It's not something you're just going to understand right off the bat. Just like I'm kind of the new era of agriculture here, we kind of see the same trend in the growers, that there's a lot of a younger generation coming in, and that younger generation is, more used to using technology, so they're more comfortable with it. When I approach some of my older growers, it is a struggle at first because it's a complete new learning curve for them. It's not what they're used to, and a lot of times that can be difficult. So I always say the biggest thing is don't go too much too fast. If you take it all on at one time, you're probably going to struggle and not be as happy as if you kind of do baby steps into it.
Well, that's really good advice. I like that. I almost apply that to anything we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Not getting that overwhelmed feeling while you're taking on something new. I like that. And then, one thing I wonder, is this a lot more costly? Does this add a lot more expense to my operation when I do this?
Yes and no. So there's a lot of savings that you get going to Substrate. Ground prep, for instance, having to, rework the field between every crop cycle, fumigation, a lot of chemicals that we can't use anymore, the labor that all that takes, you have all that savings. However, there's a lot of infrastructure that typically goes into Substrate. So now you're buying the media to grow in, the pots, potentially tables if you're doing tabletop strawberries. If you're going to be growing in a greenhouse, maybe you didn't have a greenhouse before. So there's a lot of infrastructure that's going to go in, as well as potentially a whole new irrigation system. And then you also have the automation side. So there's a lot of, I would say, upfront costs that you're going to hit, but there's savings long term. The other thing is the labor savings and potential savings of water and fertilizer. If we can utilize the water and fertilizer more efficiently, you're going to save money and save resources there, as well as with your labor. You're still going to need people in the field, but instead of having maybe 20 people, you can have 10 higher trained people to accomplish the same task. So there are some definite benefits that can come, but initially it's quite a big investment to make.
That's so interesting because the labor side is the most important, I think. And as we see wage pressure rising, I mean, we didn't have labor 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? Everybody
Yeah.
just talked about there was no labor, and guess what? We don't have any more today, right? So, and when you do find it, you have to pay them more. So if you can get that labor savings, I think, some of those other things aren't going to increase as sharply as what I see labor going up. So what a
Yeah.
benefit there. Now, what about the yields, and what about the quality? Is it any better?
I mean, it's really going to come down to a good grower. I mean, I've seen good growers on a flood irrigation system who can just kill it, but that takes a lot of experience and a lot of time to be that good of a grower. So there's a lot more ability to do your job better. We have seen typically that there are higher yields in a lot of these areas. One, because potentially you're going in a greenhouse versus outdoors. You have a better control on outside resources that you can't typically control. So you're going to have better yields because you're making that environment. If you're still growing outside, let's say strawberries and raspberries and Substrate, we've seen that there's just a better ability to manage the crop. So you're able to really drive the fruit production and drive different factors a lot easier than when you're trying to grow in the soil.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I know you're a contributor to Irrigation Magazine, also Irrigation Today Magazine, and I think you just recently wrote a article about substrate farming, right?
Right.
And so seems like the reception of this was very high. It seems like more and more people are getting interested. Do you have any sense of how many growers are switching or changing to substrate farming?
I know in the berry market, there's quite a big push. Strawberries are a little bit slower just because the infrastructure costs are very high. But there's a really big push for people to get changing, and a lot of larger packers and different things are really pushing this to their growers as well, that this is where they want the future to head for the berry market. The other big thing we've seen is indoor vertical farming. So, craft lettuces and herbs and different things like that they're growing now fully robotically indoors, with virtually, very limited human interaction. And we see that that's a trend that's probably going to continue, especially in the really urban areas, that now they can use abandoned warehouses and turn those into farms, right?
Yeah, I saw one a few months ago now in Orange County, California. They were growing microgreens in a warehouse, and what they grew it in, they basically put a cover on and delivered that to the restaurant. And
Yeah.
my gosh, the flavors that you got out of those microgreens were unbelievable. And talk about a slick, fast process.
Yeah,
That's
I
just
had a
great.
wasabi arugula, and that was probably my favorite so far.
Yeah, that's great. So we had another question here from a viewer, and I think I saw a slide on it earlier. What is all being grown right now in Substrate,
Yeah, I can go
crop
back.
wise?
These are just some kind of common ones right now. Tomatoes, cucumbers, peas, those have been grown for quite a while, typically all in greenhouse, but all in Substrate there. Strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, all your cane berries are really transitioning into Substrate. Cannabis is another big one currently, and then lettuce, herbs. The list can go on, but those are the kind of main ones that we've seen so far. I mean, I just toured a facility not too long ago. They were growing corn and Substrate. So obviously that's not going to make a long-term thing.
So that's yeah. Corn and Substrate, that's an interesting concept. I think we're having a little bit of block on our internet feed right now from Cassie, but I think she'll be back here in a second. One thing as I look at this list, and I want to ask her about in a moment when she is back, is the cannabis. It seems to me that the cannabis production got bigger. And as the cannabis production grew, amount of areas growing cannabis indoors, it seemed like the other things caught on. So I was just wondering if hey, you're back. So I was just wondering, thinking about that slide, if cannabis led indoor growing, right? It seems like there's more people growing in Substrate and indoors than before cannabis started to get popular a few years ago. Do you have any feeling on that?
Yeah, I mean, cannabis has definitely, I would say, caused some kind of leads in the market. I was trying to get my screen back up here. But cannabis becoming legalized, I mean, cannabis has been growing indoor, pretty much primarily. And they have actually caused a lot of other crops, I think, to see that as an opportunity. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a bad thing. I think that they've actually kind of opened the door up to a lot of other growers, saying that, hey, there's this opportunity for us to be able to grow a lot of other crops potentially in these environments and be able to do that more efficiently.
Yeah, I think you're right there. And I think it was maybe 3-4 years ago when we were at Western Growers and the different educational events they were having when it came to the cannabis afternoon, what's happening there, kind of an update. I mean, it was a packed house, standing room only. Everybody wanted to learn about this indoor growing, and not necessarily that they wanted to be cannabis growers, but they wanted to know what was happening in the cannabis arena and what the potential growth was, right? Because it was taking a lot of the labor away too. So this is all having a big impact on traditional agriculture, that's for sure.
Yeah, the one thing I would say for some of it that's a negative is that there's a lot more regulations on cannabis, obviously. And being able to regulate cannabis now has allowed those companies to be able to realize, hey, we can put these same regulations now onto our strawberry growers and our raspberry growers. So there has been that negative effect where, and that was part of their worries, I know, at Western Growers, was what regulations on you are now going to be pushed over to us because they realize that they can do it.
Yeah. Huh. I hadn't even thought about that. That's a really good point. So we actually have two people asking kind of the same question. And so it's has growing in Substrate. And I'm guessing almost all of this is in a greenhouse or in tunnels. Is that right?
Yeah, typically.
And so has this allowed people to grow year round, or people in the northern parts of the US to grow longer as a result of doing this?
Yeah, so for the berry market specifically, there's been some advantages of being able to get off-cycle production because the plants are movable. They can, kind of do some special things on tricking the plants into thinking it's a different time of the year before they bring them out to the field, so they can get off-cycle production, which has been helpful. And then obviously when you're going in a greenhouse or an indoor space, you really have a lot more ability to create your own climate. So that allows you to be able to grow virtually all year round because you're able to adjust that climate by obviously controls.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And then I was just going to mention, the northern latitudes. A few years ago, I was noticing how many hits our website, our Jane website, was getting from the Michigan area. And then I happened to get a call from somebody in Michigan, and they were there on business. I said, "What are you doing there?" They said, "Well, all the auto warehouses are being converted to cannabis grow houses." And it's a good use of the warehouses, and because they control the climate, they can grow just about anywhere. And I thought
Yeah.
that was really interesting.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of very industrial type areas that now that cannabis has been legalized, a lot of those old warehouses are being converted to that, or somebody trying to come in and convert it for, indoor lettuce and things like that.
Yeah. So you did a great job at touching on the water and how we figure out how much to water. The next thing I wonder about is how do I know how much fertilizer to apply?
Again, that's really going to come back to the grower and the fertilizers that you're using and the plants that you're growing. But our biggest thing is being able to get the data from that to adjust your fertilizer. So you're already going to know what your fertilizer regime is going to be. Obviously, before maybe you fertigated once a week, right? You put it on with one of your irrigations, where now you have the ability to fertigate with every irrigation. So you're going to do a lower volume spoon feeding the plant. However, now that we can get this data, salinities from the actual soil media, as well as what the EC is leaving the drain water, you can be able to make adjustments better to see maybe the plant's just not uptaking the fertilizer, and we need to look at something like higher oxygen levels, or maybe I'm over fertilizing and they just can't take it up, and it's just being wasteful at that point.
So drain water, right? I have to talk about that too. The drain water, is it reused? So they recycle it?
It is going that way. Again, back to those regulations. When you irrigate into the soil, the water goes down and people tend not to worry about it. Obviously, there's concerns about nitrate leaching and certain, reporting that growers need to do to make sure that they're not leaching too many nitrates into the groundwater, but it's not visible. As soon as we bring all these plants out of the ground, put them on mulch plastic, and water starts running off of your ranch, people notice it. So what we're doing is actually typically collecting all of that drain water currently. And in most cases, either sending it through some sort of treatment system where we can remove the nitrates for it before we release it back into, the ditch runoff or wherever it would go. So we're not putting all those nitrates back out, or we're trying to reuse it. So more and more of these systems, what we're doing is collecting that drain water, which is now, nutrient rich, treating it with UV or some other sort of disinfection to be able to kill any bacteria that are growing, and then blending that water back in with your clean well water at some sort of rate. So you have a pre-EC coming in and being able to reuse those nutrients. And that again is not only a nutrient saving, but also water savings there.
I'll tell you, it's always very exciting to hear about these new processes, new ideas. It's very hopeful, and it's great to see technology helping solve a lot of the issues that agriculture and all of us have, right? Because we all need the food from ag. So this is great to say, great to see. So we're capturing some of it and cleaning it up, and this is great. I'm also wondering what popular ways people are irrigating, right? I've seen as basic as running a emitter line from pot to pot and putting one emitter over each pot, right? It works, and it's basic to octobubblers to four-way manifolds. What are you seeing, and what are some of your favorite ways?
Yeah, so typically, back to the tried and true emitter line with a punch-on button style emitter is kind of the go-to, and then using those manifolds depending on the pot size to be able to really specifically position that water in the pot for optimum root growth. There's a lot of cost associated with that, though, the materials alone and the labor that goes into that. So we are seeing a lot of growers, if possible, trying to use an emitter line that already has or a tubing that already has the emitter built into it. So then they're able to get the spacings proper where they can position that emitter directly over the plant and be able to irrigate that way. And then obviously for indoor, there's a variety of different ways. You have customers that are flooding benches. We have, spray apparatuses, floating rafts. There's a lot of different fun stuff there.
Yeah, so everybody has their own secret sauce, right? Their own special way of doing it that works better than the next guy, right?
Yeah.
And what I've found, and I wonder if you've found this too, it seems like this group seems to be more interested in irrigation or how to water and how much than maybe I saw traditionally.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like everybody knows plants need water and fertilizer to grow, but it was just kind of we know how to do it. We just do the same thing we've always done. And now there's this change of people are actually really interested in it and wanting to understand what they're buying and what options there are and what different things they can do. So it's kind of exciting because it's opening up their eyes to kind of the options available and what stuff we really have.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why, right? And I'm not being disrespectful to the traditional farmer, but if you're somebody who just did flood irrigation, there's not that much to talk about. There's not that many tools to use in that, where with the indoor growers or the substrate growers, they tend to have a lot more tools and they want to talk about it and learn and discuss ways that they can use those.
Definitely.
So, so you've got your benefits slide up, and I'm wondering, are there any additional benefits to growing in substrate that we haven't touched on already?
We kind of touched on the soil quality. So now you're able to potentially grow plants in an area where you might not have before just because of poor soil quality. Another one that I see that's a really big benefit is the soil is never the same across 50 acres, let's say. It's going to vary throughout the whole depth of the soil as well as different areas. And it's hard to manage that when you're trying to irrigate and all of a sudden you have an area that's super sandy versus super clay.
So looks like we're having a little bit of an internet feed issue again. So if you can hear me, I just want to say that we do have another question about watermelons. Somebody's saying they really like watermelons, including myself. When Michael Pippin said last week, there's nothing better than slicing a watermelon open in the field and eating it there. I can just imagine how great that must be. So that's one of the questions we'd want to get to. But it looks like we might not get Cassie back. Fortunately, we are at the end of the segment. I want to say thank you to all our viewers for joining us today. I also want to say thank you to Cassie. She did a really great job of explaining some of the basics, the beginning basics of growing in substrate, and we very much appreciate that, Cassie. I was just saying how much I appreciate what you did today. Information was really great. Thank you. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Any final thoughts you have for us today, Cassie, before we sign off?
No, I'm sorry my internet's being a pain today, but no, I mean, I think it's a really exciting time. The future is definitely changing for ag, and I think that's for the better. There's a lot of technology we can start using in things, and substrate's really going to be I think moving forward, you're going to see a lot more about it, and I'm excited to see where it all goes.
Yeah, and I sure hope, we really did touch on just the basics or the beginner side today. I hope you'll come back in a little while and kind of take us to step two. The other thing I'd love to do someday is I'd like to get together with you and some of your fellow Cal Poly grads and talk about your experiences in irrigation and opportunities. I think that'd be really beneficial to our viewers. So hopefully you'll come back and do that with us as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. Well, listen, thank you again. Thanks, everybody. And we will hopefully catch most of you on Friday. We've got a grower, Jim Klein, who is using our water management services. He grows about 20,000 acres or manages about 20,000 acres in California. And he's going to be talking about that on Friday. So it should be very interesting. So again, Cassie, thank you. Thanks, everybody. And we'll catch you back here Friday.
Bye.